right, hello everyone, welcome. Thank you for attending my session. It's my first conference, my first presentation of a research paper, so it's really exciting. I have my professor and amazing supervisor over here, Dr. Maxwell. My paper that I'm putting out is called Using Artificial Intelligence and the Critical Factor Assessment to Predict Startup Funding Outcome. So, first, my name is Yankesh Roxy. That's an important note. Just to cover a few bases, something interesting. What's similar about these four companies? These are all tech companies, they're all internet companies. Does anyone know what's similar about these four companies, other than the fact that they all have black in their logo? Any guesses? They use AI, probably. So what's similar about these four companies is they're all incredible success stories, but they're all completely bootstrapped. So these companies did not raise external funding on the way to major success. Now, even though it's really inspiring and really awesome, it is a huge outlier. And the reality is it's very different as to which companies make it and which companies do not. Generally speaking, companies that raise funding succeed at a much higher rate than companies who do not raise funding. But that will not be the focus of my research. From all the different funding sources that a startup can raise, I'm specifically focusing on business angels. Even though VCs are cool and they give a lot of money, in the US in 2021, VCs invested $315 billion, and BAs only raised 1/10 of it. BAs actually account for 84% of total startup deals, so they cover a much wider amount of startups. They take a lot more risks, and they support our general economy in a significant way. Now, generally speaking, we all know that raising funding is really difficult. And it's sort of a catch-22 because you need track record and proof to raise funding, but you also need funding to build a track record and proof. And in my own experience, I've worked in various startups. I've raised about $10 million in the startups that I've worked with or startups that I was a part of. And I've seen myself, a lot of individuals come to pitch their startup or come to pitch their idea. And it's an amazing idea. They're an amazing person. They're a very smart engineer, but they simply do not know how to raise funds. They do not know how to present, what evidence to present, and even business angels themselves are very well known to make poor decisions due to inexperience. They're not necessarily professional investors a lot of the time, and they just want to get into the game. One particular interest by Daniel Kahneman, who has investigated the decision-making of humans in general, but also took a look at some investors, proposed that using a structured decision-making approach can really help improve decision-making accuracy, but also help both investors and entrepreneurs in understanding how investments are made. So, a really interesting example that I'd like to show you, not only is it an example, it's actually my motivation and inspiration, the critical factor assessment. It is a structured decision-making approach developed in the 1980s here in Canada in Waterloo. It had officially featured 37 different factors that assess the commercial viability of a startup. It's been widely used. It was used by the Canadian government and the NRC IRAP. It's been used in the IAP program, Innovators Assistance Program. And later, even though it had 37 factors upon release, it was later refined to 4 factors. Fun fact, the paper that actually proposed the 4 factors won the runner-up of the best paper award in the CCSBE in 1999. So it was a very neat fact. I only found this out later. So basically, Asserbro managed to group these factors into 4 different factors that were able to predict whether a new innovation, so it was an R&D project, whether it was from an engineering school, whether it was an innovation project proposed for grants, he was able to propose this model that was able to predict with a very high accuracy whether this project would succeed or not in the field, whether it would achieve commercial viability. Fast forward into 2004, Dr. Maxwell joined the Canadian Innovation Center, and he started to utilize the CFA and implementing it in various companies in the market. But for his PhD paper, he decided to investigate the efficacy as to whether the CFA can translate to how investors make decisions. Can we use the critical factor assessment theory and model to predict which companies investors will invest in and which will they not? So he used the Dragon's Den. It was actually in the studio itself, not watching TV shows, in the studio itself, helping them get started and analyzing the interaction between entrepreneurs and the investors, and using the CFA, and I will explain a little bit how, using the CFA to try to predict will the startup receive funding or not? So he found that using an 8-factor model provided an overall accuracy of 87.5% predictive accuracy. Well, what's even more interesting is that he found that investors use an elimination by aspect method, and if he applied an 8-factor model to the decision making that, or rather he observed that investors make their decisions, and if he used the 8-factor model, he was able to predict 100% of the time which startups the investors will not invest in. So if the startups got a low grade, a C, using the CFA model, 100% of the time, that means they would not receive an investment, which was a really, really interesting finding. Now, even though this model has been developing and has been proving really successful, both on the academic front and in the actual industry, implementing the CFA takes a lot of time. It takes 6 weeks, costs $1,400, requires 3 different trained experts to provide a non-biased opinion. And even though it's phenomenal and amazing and requested by many universities and accelerators, it's not really accessible to entrepreneurs, to students, and to the general public to leverage and to deeper understand the investment decision-making process. So here's a little bit of a sneak peek into what, for example, 4 different factors look like. What is a structured decision-making approach? So there is, per each factor, there is different criteria and questions that the panel would ask when assigning a grade to a specific startup, right? So they would, for example, evaluate the features and benefits. Does this product offer advantages? In adoption, can the startup demonstrate customer intents to buy the product or service? And they would grade it. And I will show in a minute just how. So that's when I started looking at it, researching it, understanding it, and this amazing model that's very time consuming, that's very resource intensive. Can AI be used to help us with some of those time and resource constraints? Can it help entrepreneurs and investors? And back to referencing Daniel Kahneman, he himself in 2011 proposed that AI can enhance objective decision making, reduce cognitive bias, and generally help both investors and entrepreneurs in making better decisions. And as we may know, once an AI model is properly trained and deployed, it's very cost effective, it's very scalable, and offers real-time processing compared to the CFA. You need to find the experts, you need to engage with them, you need to present to them, and it offers a lot of challenges. So some relevant AI research in the field, there has been some. This one has specifically 2 papers that are using Shark Tank data, very similar to Dragon's Den, used various types of metadata, so for example, the investment amount, the valuation, team composition, etc., and built artificial intelligence models around it to try and predict again whether Shark Tank pitches will receive an investment or not. And we're able to do it within a 60 to 67% accuracy. Another important, this one's my favorite actually, really interesting paper. This one, I believe is from Stanford. They actually use a lot more advanced machine learning techniques in analyzing audio from the engagements, and this was before ChatGPT, so they used various audio samples and processed the sentiment and the voice and the tonality, and their model reached a predictive accuracy of 66%. Now, a very important piece of advancement in AI in recent history that we all know about, maybe we don't know the science behind it, but there was a paper published that's called Attention is All You Need, which proposed a self-attention mechanisms that is basically the background to ChatGPT as we know it today. It is a mechanism that allows to extract context from text, it vectorizes text. There's a whole lot of science that goes behind it. This is not a science conference, but this has been a very pivotal moment in machine learning, in large language machine learning models. And I decided to take a look at, can pre-trained models such as GPT and BERT that are built on top of these systems, can they be useful to people such as myself in understanding pitch text and then actually be effective in predicting investor decision making? So this is where I paused and I took a look at all this data and the availability and the technologies, and I started to think about how can I apply this to research. So my research focus broke down into 2 questions. Can a structured AI model, so in my case, I used the CFA and AI, can it grade startup pitches using the 8-factor form? And then, how accurately can it predict business angel investment decision outcomes? So my methodology basically was a little circular because I had to keep iterating and refining. So I had to train a custom transformer. So that's basically the same technology that's behind ChatGPT. I had to feed startup pitches into it, get the score, evaluate whether they will receive funding or not, test it on new data, determine if the model is effective, and then complete this. That's the cycle that I used to train my model and improve it and see if I can get effective results. So I use Shark Tank data. In Dr. Maxwell's paper, he addressed the validity about the fact that Dragon's Den, even though it is a TV show, it highly resembles real interactions in real life between investors and entrepreneurs. I found a large database of all the Shark Tank episodes with 53 fields of data, and I ultimately found the transcripts behind these TV shows because I needed to feed the text and extract contextual data from the text. Now, the first thing that I did is I built a tool to synthesize features. So synthesize grades, 8 grades across the 8 critical factors based on Andrew's model. And I built a tool. So this is not just a ChatGPT tool. I actually had to write 36 lines of code in the backend to process it and pre-train the data and do all this kind of fun stuff. And it took these 8 factors and gave me a grade. And I leveraged some awesome OpenAI technology in the backend. This is what it looked like, just a sneak peek. All the pitches went through my tool and gave scores across 8 factors and then a factor sum them. Now I fed them through a bunch of models, logistic regression, neural nets, tried everything under the sun essentially. And I've also applied some machine learning techniques. I'm not going to go too in depth, but applied multiple machine learning techniques. My classes were not balanced on the Shark Tank TV show. About 66% of pitches receive an investment, probably for the excitement of the show. So I did have this issue to tackle. But I did create a balanced score, and I'll explain in the next slide what it means. I created a balanced metric to evaluate, is my model accurate or is it not? Most importantly, I know a lot of the time when we're looking at AI research, you use metrics like accuracy. But in my case, due to a few reasons, especially because I had an invalid data set, I was looking at something called an F1 score, which is a balance between precision and recall. And I can tackle it in a little bit. So my initial results, after trying a bunch of models. I've received a few models that delivered pretty comparable results, but what's interesting is that in Dr. Andrew Maxwell's research, all 8 factors that I've shown were important in delivering the highest accuracy predictive model. In my research, different combinations of factors yielded the best results, so not all 8. For example, in this chart, the number 1 model based on predictive accuracy used the following 5 factors that correlate to the right. And since then, since I've submitted the paper, I've received much better results that look like this. And what I want to highlight is the fact that in Dr. Andrew Maxwell's research, the thing that he was able to predict most was whether a startup will not receive an investment. My model has a score of specificity of 63. What this means is that my model actually suffered and predicted which startups will not receive an investment worse than positive investments. But my model predicted which startup will receive an investment better, probably because of the class imbalance, probably because there's a lot more data to train on of startups that receive an investment. There's a lot of other reasons for why it could be. But generally speaking, I was very, very, very happy with the results that I've achieved. 79% predictive accuracy, which basically means out of the total predictions that my model made, it predicts 79% of the time which startup will receive or not receive funding correctly. Now, some discussion. Although my model performed a little bit worse, my model as of today, it will keep improving, performed worse than Dr. Andrew Maxwell's manual model, and my model did better. It is obviously a lot more deployable. I have an online tool that I will show you in just a moment that anybody can go on. We've already been testing it a lot. Anybody can go on and get their startup pitch evaluated immediately. You don't need a lot of money and access and all this kind of stuff. I also need to investigate as to why certain factors were never shown. So if you recall from the chart, not all factors are present here, which is not in alignment with some of the previous research. So that's something that I really need to investigate. Like, why does adoption never show up? And there was an interesting hypothesis, and that's startups that come on Shark Tank have already all achieved some level of adoption. They bring startups into the show that have already some level of sales, some level of customers. So maybe that's not a factor that they really consider as much. It's an interesting investigation. Compared to all the past Shark Tank data, all the Shark Tank AI papers, Mine performed extremely well, and I'm very grateful. I was really lucky. I started my research right before GPT came out, so I was able to leverage this incredible tool. And I'm also the only one of the papers that uses structured decision-making approach, which is a CFA. So what I found is that synthesizing CFA features using GPT is a huge win. It clearly has some predictive accuracy, but I do need further validation, and I do have some ideas as to how that's going to happen. Now, when it comes to future research, for us to actually be able to help entrepreneurs, just giving a grade is not enough. We need to provide evaluations and recommendations in terms of, okay, you got a grade, now what? Or why did you get a grade? Or what can you do to improve the grade? So I'm going to show you in just a minute what that looks like, and we're working on it. I also need to test my data robustly with its ability to generalize outside of the Shark Tank data set, and I have already began to do that, and it's showing really promising results. I'll show you that in a second. I do need to validate whether the CFA AI is able to extract features effectively. I have a hypothesis that it's clearly not, perhaps, because it's not using all, like for example, it never used adoption as a factor in the AI's decision-making model. So I need to investigate why to validate the feature extraction. All right, what does it mean for next steps? For commercialization, I built a tool called xpage.com that we've been starting to use. I'm not sure if I've ever spoken to any of you here, but I've tried to speak to almost every university that's in Canada that's well known, that has a business school or an engineering school, to the accelerators, to the incubators, and I've received a lot of really positive feedback. We did start to use this tool with students at our engineering school to help them build better startups. I've met with NRC IRAP, and they love this tool. They really want to implement it across all their agents, and we're in talks. And ultimately, I want to speak to all of you and hear your feedback and support. None of this would be possible without meeting with dozens of professors and academics and people from the field that really helped me fine-tune what I've done to date. So, I'm not using mic backup, I'm using a different computer here, but nonetheless, I can show a quick demo of the team. So xpage.com, deployed my tool, available online to everyone. You can submit your pitch in video, in audio, or in text format. So let's type in your email. And you're able to submit a pitch. Now, we have a few examples: GitLab, DoorDash, and Coinbase, all the Y Combinator pitches. So let's take a look at Coinbase. This is already like pre-populated, so that's why it was so fast. It wouldn't be this fast. Surprisingly, even Coinbase, as we know it today, is a very successful company. It got a pretty low grade. Now, why is that? And we would need to open each of these factors to really take a look. But actually, this pitch that I fed was their first ever pitch at Y Combinator before they really had major traction. And something that's interesting is in that pitch, they never mentioned how they're going to make money. They never mentioned any business model, and the entrepreneurs never had any experience. If you actually go and read the pitch, it's down below. So my model was actually able to correctly catch that and say that across these new factors, the score was NA. And here's an example of what evaluation and recommendation looks like. The pitch does not provide enough information about the team's entrepreneurial experience. To bolster a startup entrepreneurial foundation, it's crucial for the team to provide more information. This will include featuring track record, et cetera, et cetera. This is pretty obvious stuff, and this is a pretty old example, but that's what it essentially looked like in terms of recommendation and evaluation. So that is all. Thank you very much. Put the hands on. A couple minutes for questions.
Yes. Yeah, I think I have 5 minutes for Q&A.
Great. Thank you. So,
Need any volunteers or testing for their pitch? That's why they're want. Like, do you need any pitches to inspire?
yes, absolutely. Getting access on to data sets of pitches, but with the investment outcome known, or some sort of an outcome known, would be extremely beneficial. I would be very, very great. That's a good point. I should have made it clear. Asked if anybody here has access to good data sets, I would be very, very grateful.
I've got a question. Thank you so much first for this excellent presentation. Really interesting indeed. Do you plan on actually developing a tool for different languages?
Very interesting question. That was not in my plans, but I would imagine that it would be not too difficult, just because what I need to focus on for different languages is actually the feature extraction, and a lot of these LLMs are being trained in different languages. But I would really need to test: is it as effective in Spanish as it is in English by just switching the switch? So it's a great question, actually. I do need to look into that.
I can be volunteer for French.
Fantastic. Yes.
The data set was fascinating, where we get something very casual and then open subtitles. Did those match? Like, do you have to do a complete matching of what you found on open subtitles with the casual data?
Yeah, so Cadwell basically provided me with 53 fields of metadata and the season, the episode title, etc. So then we went and found subtitles for those exact episodes. We basically run through the script, cut out the pitches, and we had to do a manual labor process for that. But yeah, we were able to do that manually.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. It's very fascinating. I was wondering, when you train model, maybe I consider kind of attitude towards some sort of facial expressions, because it seems like we basically use scripts to build provide reason on that. And then the solution also will be the right scripts. But I assume that when people make decisions, they also consider through the body language, facial expressions, the way they talk, and also really to consider those factors. Or
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. And so that facial expressions, tonality, and also to build on top of that, in Dr. Maxwell's research, one thing that he found that trumps all of these factors is something that's trust. So if the entrepreneur ever says during the course of the engagement things that contradict one another, or does a series of things that break trust, as an example, that would be a large cause for failure. Things like text tonality and specific words and why they use them. So I know there was a really interesting paper that basically looked at financial reporting of companies, and it was able to predict from the CEO's written message about the upcoming financials, whether the financials would be down or up. So that's really interesting. So I would really love to integrate technology like that. I think that would take it to the next level.
This might be completely sort of
Off in left field, but I'm curious how the setup of this sort of puts Shark Tank and Dragons Den as sort of like the gold standard. It's like, we want to predict if they got it right. It sort of implies they're right. And so I'm curious if you think there's any opportunity for this technology to like try to poke holes in what did one of your investors miss or something like that, because they don't always get it right? They're not.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's something that's extremely interesting that I've seen, and that my model was not able to predict whether the sharks would reject the pitch because the valuation ask was absurd.
Right. Oh.
So that was interesting. So for example, they value themselves at really high. They wanted a small percent. That's not one of the metrics that I really tested for.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's actually, there's a two-way street here.
Right.
Can I poke holes in what they did, and can what happens in reality poke holes in what I did? And the answer is absolutely yes to both. I agree that Shark Tank is not the golden standard. I think there was just a lot of papers because of the ease of use and like the data is just accessible.
Yeah.
If anybody has data sets that I could generalize to, that would be fantastic. I started doing it manually. The problem is data standardization. I need like 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 pitches from a similar source that are codified, that have a known outcome. And I've started to work with some organizations, but I would love more if anybody has.
Yeah, I just want that to. The CFA was not developed as a TV show. Right?
Yeah.
It was developed based on actual investments and more,
Yes.
a whole variety of different angel VC pitches. It was just on the TV show, we actually had the videos of what was going on, so we could actually use them to illustrate in the classroom
why people got money and why they didn't. So it was a much better educational. That's just it. The second thing, the CFA goes at the bare bones of the venture. It doesn't focus so much on your pitching skill.
Yeah.
So it's, and therefore, if you take that and apply it to an early stage entrepreneur who's got a venture, and you can get down to the basic 8 bare bones, you can tell what to improve. Once they fix those basic problems, they nibble with other pitching and other things. So the whole thesis is there are 8 basic things you have to get right to even be considered.
Right.
And if you get wrong on any one of them, you'll get rejected. And then later on, there's entrepreneurial characteristics, there's trust, there's all those other things that feed in. So it's not as simple, but if you've got a basic fatal flaw and you're 8, you're out of luck. And the tool is actually not developed to help people make investment decisions. It's developed to help entrepreneurs improve their businesses so that they don't have a fatal flaw. That's what it's designed for. So if you do this and you say, bad score on this, then my comment would be, go away and look at why you got a bad score on that. It will, by the way, it will tell you some ideas. Because maybe you can pick that. You need to fix that before you do anything else. There's no point in doing a perfect pitch if you still got no evidence the customers want your product.
Sorry, I thought.
I'll happily talk to you guys. Yeah. Thank you very much.